Sir, thank you for coming.
Hey, how you doing? Nice to see you.
Very good. Just telling my students that how much I've enjoyed reading their book reviews from your book, and they all chose a different story to talk about as the one that stood out to them as the most surprising.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. That's just humbling to me. You're the fifth university that has used my books. Two of them actually put them in their curriculum, and I'm telling you what, when I wrote it, I was just writing it to get the truth out there, to let people know about the other side of the coin. And wow, when students read it and use it, it humbles me to death. I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate it. It was an amazing read because I read books about prisons and things, and it's usually written from an academic point of view or the warden's point of view, and sometimes the prisoner's point of view.
Yeah.
But you almost never get that. You had a very different perspective being a part of investigations that you got to see probably many cases where there was this type of corruption happening that didn't even make it into the book yet. You're going to have a third book come out soon, right?
Yes. Now, the third book is going to be called The Toughest Job. Now, I've written my two books about corruption. So I want to write one about how tough the job is for correctional officers, because I'd like everybody to know that although I did 12 years of internal affairs out of my 28.8 years, there's also all the honest officers now, which is the majority, folks. Those books are telling you about those bad apples that paint the image of honest officers. So I thought, now it's time for me to write a book about how tough the job is for the honest correctional officer. So that one's coming out next. It's going to be called The Toughest Job, and it's going to have all the scenarios and things officers have to do within their career and the dangers they face.
You know what would be a great way to probably to start the class today is if you have you seen what happened just a few days ago at that jail where a correctional officer was taken hostage?
Yes, and injured, and then the inmate was shot.
Yes.
Yes.
From your
Yes,
perspective, what did you think about that? Is that a terribly common thing, or was that shocking?
well, I've been asked. I'm a writer for corrections1.com. For those of you out there, it's free to sign up for corrections1.com. I think there's 380,000 followers, but it's an online corrections magazine. It's funny you brought that up because just today my the chief editor asked me to write an article on that, and she sent me the link as well. So what you just asked me about, I'm getting ready to start an article on it tomorrow, and I'm going to have a chapter in the book The Toughest Job about the hostage situation. Let me tell you, of course we must train for these situations, but folks, let me give you an example. There's a prison near me here with 1,100 inmates called Polk Correctional Institution, Florida. At any given time, there's 26 to 30 officers on duty to 1,100 inmates. Now you say, how do you control that? Well, they're in separate dorms. So you have officers assigned to dorms, but you also have prison recreation, feeding time. It's very hard to control it. There's an old saying in the prison system: the inmates could take over whenever they want to. Well, as you can see, hostage situations come up several times a year. You're going to hear about them. We can only watch so much. We can only control so much. If the inmates want to take over the prison and they plan it carefully, which they have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to plan things out, they will look for the weakest link, meaning maybe they'll hit when they have officers on duty that are not alert, that are sluggish, low self-esteem. They're not going to try to take hostage officers that are aware of what's going on and maybe can defend themselves fairly decently. They're going to go for the weakest link, and that's when they're going to hit. And I'm not saying that this officer that was taken hostage was weak, but alone, alone also, being alone, you can't match against all the inmates. So a hostage situation is a terrible, terrible thing. and it happens quite often, to answer your question.
Thank you. It seems like such a terrifying job because you are totally outnumbered. There's all kinds of hostility. So even if you went in there as an officer and you wanted to do a good job, be professional, not get any more animosity between you and the prisoners, and you want to do your job really well and treat people with respect, but then you're coming in there with all the baggage and they might see you as a target, and you never know when something like that could happen. It sounds really probably scares a lot of people away from that job.
Yes, it does. And you made a great point about doing your job correctly. Now, you can be firm, fair, and consistent, make everybody do what they're supposed to do, but be fair, not be a RoboCop. You're going to do what I say, or I'm going to do this. Come on. Does that work with your family? Does that work with the people at the grocery store? It's the same way in prison. Be firm, fair, and consistent. Hey, when I was an officer, I didn't give them contraband. I didn't allow them to do things they're not allowed to do. And I had a couple of them say, if we ever take this prison over, Officer York, we won't let anybody hurt you. We may take you hostage, but we won't let anybody hurt you. And I was new, so I was like, what the heck did they just tell me? Am I doing my job right? I'm not letting them get away with anything. But see, inmates respect. Two-way street. I'm not trying to say we're going to coddle them, but if you treat them like humans, they're going to treat you good when I won't use those words that we use in prison. When the blank hits the fan, they will treat you accordingly.
Right. They don't want to see any kind of double standard or unfairness, or the people who are offering favors or contraband or looking the other way, but then they try to enforce the rules against someone else. It's just too much inconsistency. Right.
You don't want to be a weak officer, and you don't want to be a RoboCop. And I think everybody in your class understands what I'm saying. Find that medium ground, be firm, fair, and consistent.
Could you tell us how you got into corrections as a career, and then how you got to be an inspector?
Yes, I did 10 years in the military police. Right after high school, I went in the Army, joined the military police. I did 10 years, made it to staff sergeant, and then I got out of the Army and needed a quick job. So I go down to the local prison over here, and they walked me through the prison, and they said, we have to do a background check and physical and all that, drug test. And I got hired. So folks, this happens to many people that I've talked to. In my mind, this job will hold me over. And I'd applied for the Tampa Police Department as well at the same time. The prison called me first. So I went to the prison. And when Tampa PD called, I said, well, I'm already at the prison. Let me try this for a while. Well, 28.8 years later, I retired. But I went from correctional officer. Then I was promoted to felony probation officer. And then I was promoted to senior probation officer for community control offenders, a little harder to handle type offender. And then I got promoted to senior prison inspector, where for 12 years I did the internal affairs investigations. And then time just kept flying by as I'm working, and next thing I know, I'm retired from it.
When you got into internal affairs, from reading just the way that they would assign you to cases, I assume that you would get an allegation or a report. It might be screened out as not being worth investigating. There's just not enough evidence or something. But about how many cases did you actually uncover some type of corruption or some type of criminal behavior? And how many cases was it just a false alarm, just a false accusation?
Okay, let me preface that. We're saying you might want to know how we get these allegations. So every prison is mandated to report to the Inspector General's office by 10 a.m. all incidents over the 24-hour period. So every day the inspector's office starts getting these faxes in, now it would be email, because going paperless in a lot of places. And they would report incidents. Then the IG's office has a list of incident types. Some of these incidents would be investigated by the warden and his crew, smaller incidents. Other incidents may be investigated by an administrative lieutenant. Two officers got jealous over somebody and had an argument with each other, verbal argument. Hey, it happens, folks. It's the workplace. So, and then my boss would say, this one says staff inmate relationship allegation. An officer saw another officer hand something to an inmate, and the inmate put it in his property. It looked like a photo, blah, blah, blah. That's something I would investigate. Criminal, civil, and administrative, certain categories. Staff inmate relationship, ag assaults, murder, serious criminal crimes, and serious administrative allegations would come to our office. And I would get assigned, and I would have my car, which was basically my office. I had an office to go back and write reports, but you spend most of your time traveling from prison to prison doing investigations. I sometimes did my reports in the hotel room at night when I was there typing up my report, not even go back to my office to type it up.
Florida's a surprisingly big state to try to get around.
It is. It's very large and a lot of driving.
It doesn't look that big on a map, but once you try to drive from the Panhandle down to the to the bottom, it's
very long. Yeah.
But I like that in your books that you would put little descriptions in there about driving past certain places and landmarks and stuff. So it kind of every time I always think of Florida when I think about your book. It made it more local. So I've been doing some data analysis for Ohio, the state of Ohio's prison system, and I'm looking at misconduct among the prisoners. And I can't match it to misconduct among the officers. They didn't keep records. I'm sure the Inspector General's office might have records, but I don't have them. And I found 2,000 times in a 4-year period where a prisoner was found guilty of having a relationship with an officer, an inappropriate relationship. And it could have been a sexual relationship. It might have been a business relationship, but it's just an inappropriate relationship. The prisoner was found guilty 2,000 times. There's no secrets in a prison. There's too many people around. How do they get away with this? What makes them think they can have these types of relationships?
Well, I'll answer that. I think I missed one part of your last question. Let's say I get assigned 10 investigations. 3 or 4 would be substantiated.
Oh, okay.
3 or 4 out of every 10 would be substantiated. Because if somebody's taking the time to make a serious allegation, there's possibly going to be something to it. 3 or 4 out of every 10 would be substantiated in my work time and from what I've done. And to answer your question, it is amazing how they think they can get away with it. And I don't understand how they see one person being walked off the compound and being fired, possibly arrested for sex with an inmate, and continue with their relationship with an inmate and think, well, the mindset is I won't get caught. They got caught, but I'm smart enough not to get caught. Now, there's greed. There's the greed element. Some of these people are making some pretty big bucks, not only sleeping with the inmate, but bringing in contraband to the inmate. There's the low self-esteem element, of course, where somebody is mistreated at home, told they're stupid, told they're ugly, and then this inmate who pumps weights all the time, this big, strong inmate, says, you're so beautiful. I really like you. You're really talented. Now they're building the person up. Inmate manipulation is what that is. Manipulating their way into the person's mind. Now that goes both ways, folks. I've worked at women's prisons where the male officers went for the same inmate manipulation tactics. It goes both ways. So, and then it's because there's so many people, they usually have a lookout. The food service folks try to go. I've had cases where they had sex in the meat cooler, food in the cold storage area, the little mop room, they squeeze in there. Everybody goes to eat, but this one inmate stays back, says, I don't feel good. And everybody's out of the dorm to eat. The officer locks the door and they go do their thing. So, again, it's a small percentage of them that make the others look bad.
Yeah, and so I was watching some of your videos that you have on YouTube. You were talking about that you were actually in the movie or the miniseries, the Escape from Dannemora, and you were brought in as an expert. How did that all happen? And that was really a similar situation, right? Where this woman who worked in the prison was trying to help prisoner escape.
That's a true story. Escape at Dannemora. Escape from Dannemora was produced by Ben Stiller. True story about Joyce Mitchell, who was a sewing teacher. And the male inmates are in this male prison and they're learning how to sew. And she became sexually active with 2 inmates, and they manipulated her into bringing tools in, and they escaped. They wanted her to pick them up when they came out of the they cut out the walls behind their cells, went down to the pipes and cut holes in the big piping, almost like Shawshank Redemption, except these pipes didn't have all the sewage going through it. And they went through those pipes and popped up out of a manhole on the street. She got scared at the last minute and did not show up. Their plan was revealed that they were going to kill her anyway later on down the road, just use her to get away. That's the thing a lot of these people don't understand. The inmates are going to just use you and then throw you away when they're done. Anyway, she went to prison. Another officer went to prison in the case as well. And they asked me to be a control room officer in episode 5. Ben Stiller was trying to find real correctional officers to play certain parts. So a friend of mine was friends with one of the Showtime's casting people. Shot them a message that you need to use Gary York, and he contacted me on Facebook. Next thing I know, they're flying me to Queens, and we filmed in Staten Island. It was a great experience.
It is because you have so many stories like that in your book where there's someone has a relationship, like the taxes. One of my students brought that up as one of the examples from your book that stood out to them, is people filing these false tax reports to get tax refunds to the IRS, and they were doing it with the help of one of the officers, and just how the whole operation happening inside the prison. You know, one point about prisons is supposed to incapacitate people so they can't commit crimes. And they're committing crimes against the federal government, the IRS.
Yes, you know, that's why inmates look for the weakest link. Inmates that want to continue crimes cannot do it if they don't have somebody working in the prison to help connect them on the outside. Usually what they like to have, here's the inmate, here's my middle person, somebody that works in here, and then they have people on the street, of course, that supply the money to pay that person or give them what they need brought into the prison. So they have to have that middle person. Without that middle person, they're stuck. They can only do things in the prison, and those type of crimes would be assaulting an officer, assaulting another inmate, or, you know, things like that. But as far as their drugs, contraband smuggling, tax forms being falsified, tax fraud, and all those type of things, that has to be done with a middle person.
Yeah. You know, I usually do research on classification, and then part of that is misconduct. So I'm trying to predict prisoner misconduct. What kind of trouble do they get in? And when I would always bring up with people about drugs, that there's drugs in prison, and they found marijuana, alcohol, even alcohol that's made in the prison. And I would say, okay, we can predict this pretty well, but it's harder to predict a fight, because when people get in fights, it's kind of more situational. 2 people just had a bad day and got in a fight. But you can predict the drugs and the smuggling. And I was trying to explain this, and they said, but that's not really important. That, of course, they're going to be trying to get drugs because prison's a bad place and they just want to relax or escape in their mind. And you make a very compelling argument that the drug market in the prisons puts everybody at risk. And there's risk of overdose, there's risk of violence, and the market actually gives power to gangs and people who run those underground markets. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Exactly. Let me tell you, officers that work the front line, 99% will tell you. The other 1, 2, or 3% anyway are the ones helping the inmates. So we don't want to use them. But the honest officers will tell you, when a crooked officer or a crooked prison employee, civilian employee, when they start bringing contraband to inmates, drugs, weapons, you're placing everybody in danger, and the inmates as well. These inmates get high on these drugs and they start to fight each other. Gang members, just like on the street, are having turf wars. Don't bring your junk over here to sell. This is my area. I'm selling over here. And it starts gang fights. An officer catches an inmate doing something wrong. The inmate is high on drugs. And the officer's in his cell saying, come out of your cell. And the inmate is reaching somewhere to get that knife that was smuggled in, or that shank that they made, homemade weapon. You can't tell me it's not dangerous, this drug smuggling trade. Very dangerous to everyone in the prison. If you work that front line, then you'll know how dangerous it is for contraband to be coming into a prison.
And kind of like the story that you wrote about with the kids who were in the teenagers who were in a drug treatment program, but they were it was just really poorly run treatment program. That really stood out to me because in Ohio, we found that the number one group of people who fail their drug tests and get caught with drugs are the people in the drug treatment programs. It's undermining their treatment. It's like their one chance to get some good treatment, and they're still using drugs in prison.
Yeah.
Oh, I think you got muted again. Sorry. I'm sorry, your computer muted. It muted you again.
And using them under the counselor's nose, and that particular place had actual correctional officers assigned there to work all 3 shifts. So it's very disturbing that they were using drugs while in this program.
Right. Your microphone cut out a little bit there, but I think we kind of got what you were saying there. For a lot of people,
somebody just said something. I saw a comment. I jumped from drugs to shanks. The reason I did that, it's hand in hand in prison. If you're a drug dealer in prison and you're hiding your contraband, you're going to have homemade weapons as well. They're protecting their territory. Unbelievable, the amount of weapons. So usually if there's drugs, there's a weapon of some type close by. And I'm sorry if that...
Well, that sounds more like if there's contraband, then there's a weapon of some sort close by. Then if there's drugs, it sounds more like the contraband is the problem than the drugs themselves.
The way it gets smuggled in, you mean? Like there's a network for both?
No, I'm saying because it's illegal, they want to defend it.
Got it.
Not like if it was fine to like bring in like drug say, let's just say if it was okay to bring in alcohol and marijuana, then they wouldn't have to defend it as much. They wouldn't have to hide it. They wouldn't have to protect themselves from it. And there could be a system in place to make it so that finances are not likely to break out. I'm not saying those things should be allowed. I'm just saying it's more about the fact that it's contraband than it is about the fact that it's drugs.
Right. I think I understand your point, and I understand your point. That's a good point. Yes. And obviously you're right. We don't want those things in there because what happens then, unfortunately, even if we allow something, they'll end up fighting over it because we allow food, of course, and they make bets with food and they bet their food trays on football games. And then when somebody doesn't pay, now we have a fight over food, which is allowed in the prison, and they're fighting over food. It's a tough situation. And I agree with your comment, though. I know your concept you just brought up, and it's true.
Bobby asked, would you say more weapons are made in prison or smuggled in?
I would say more are made in prison. And then the very serious ones, we've had actual guns smuggled in prison by staff members. So but more are made in prison than are smuggled in my opinion.
And Kat said, I think a prisoner would still be very protective of any of their stuff, illegal or not. That kind of
Right.
reminds me, one of your stories was a man, he was killed over a picture, right? That he had a picture hanging up in his cell, and when he came back, there was a fight, and then he got killed over it?
Yes. The inmates can go off. Not now, when I say inmates, please, I don't want to generalize. A lot of inmates are in there just doing their time. They're not going to bother anybody. So I guess we should get that out there. There's a lot of inmates not going to bother anybody, hurt anybody. They don't even want these guys that are doing these bad things to be doing them because they don't want to get involved, or see something. But yes, one inmate killed another inmate just because he was staring at him and looking at him the wrong way. And then he was making comments to him, derogatory comments. And it ended up to be a stabbing and a murder. That's in the book. You can get killed in some situations by making fun of the wrong inmate, picking on the wrong guy.
Oh, here's a great question for you. Can I ask you, why would a staff member smuggle in a gun knowing the possible outcomes? What do you think goes through their heads? Because there's no good outcome to that. That's a very good point.
That is a great question. One that we've asked ourselves many times over the years. And I'm going to say greed might be one thing. I've seen people get paid up in the thousands and thousands of dollars to smuggle a gun in for somebody. Some of these inmates have some very wealthy people on the outside where the wealth comes self-made. Some of the wealth comes from a lot of drugs and the drug lords. And the real life, not the TV life, is sometimes big money is paid to get a gun into the prison. Inmate manipulation, again, is the key. Somehow this staff member was manipulated by an inmate to become their friend. And then the big bucks came into play, and they thought, just this one time, and I'm going based on interviews after the fact on a lot of these answers. Some of them have said, I thought just this one time, a quick one-time deal, solve all my financial problems, because inmates know, they listen to you talk. A lot of prison staff members make a mistake, talk about their financial problems, divorce issues, and the inmates hear it. Well, they'll wait till you're done talking to your friend, and then they'll slowly start to manipulate you. I can help you save your house. I know you're single with 2 children. I can save you just this one time. It's wrong. We know it's wrong. Never turns out good. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just telling you from the investigative side. Why do people do it? That's just a couple of the reasons.
This is a great time to ask you a question I really wanted to ask you. Is people are always asking, why would some correctional officers, like the horrifying case you told about the double murderer who was killed, beaten to death by the prison staff, a lot of my students, when they wrote their book review, they brought that out as the example of the one that they just totally surprised them. And when you have a case like that, or the corruption where even the superintendent of all the prisons was throwing these lavish parties, is it a cultural thing that they feel like that no one can hold them accountable, that they're above the law? Or does power by itself, is it naturally corrupting? Is it corrupt people creating a corrupt culture? Or the far more extreme what psychologists would say is that anytime you have too much power, you're going to abuse your power?
Yes. Now, folks, I think there's a combination here. The power issue, and as we say down here, the good old boy system. That good old boy system is not good, because that silence, keeping that silence never helps anybody. And it's not going to teach new officers how to properly act and conduct their job. And the honest officers are usually bullied by this type of group. So now your honest officers and your new officers either have to stay totally out of it or join the group. And that's not the right thing to do. And then they're afraid to report these corrupt folks because they have all the power. And we have to stop that. And, you know, we are not vigilantes. If an inmate attacks an officer, like in the double murder where he bites a chunk of meat out of the officer's face, we're going to take him down, secure him, get the officer to medical. We're also going to take the inmate to medical. But once that's done, we can't abuse the inmate. You can't do that. The law is not in our hands. The judge and jury decided this inmate's in for life for double murder. It's not our job now to start beating the inmate for 5 days until he dies. And of course, the outcome is not good. And so this vigilantism is power, I believe, is a lot to do with it in the mind. And the good old boy system breeds it. And we've been fighting to get that out of our corrections across the country. No, you don't let an inmate hit you. Yes, you defend yourself, but you sure don't take things out of hand to become a vigilante. That's not what we do.
I can imagine as a prison inspector, you show up and there were probably a lot of people, the corrupt management and officers who were afraid to see you. They probably didn't like you very much. They might see you on the side of the prisoners.
I'm going to tell you what, I wasn't on anybody's side. And I always told everybody that. A prison inspector's job can be very lonely, but you have to be fair and impartial on everything you do. If you walk in with a case file and an inmate alleges he's been abused by an officer, I have to treat both sides equally. How would I not do that and be a good investigator? How could I go in and say, if I went in and said, that darn inmate's lying, I know he is. That's my mindset from the beginning. That's not being fair and impartial. And if you have to be fair and impartial, some cases the inmate's telling the truth and we proved it. Some cases the inmate is lying because that officer does such a good job at making them do what they're supposed to do. They need that officer out of their dorm. He or she is impeding their business and they don't like that officer doing everything correctly. You got to figure out which way we're going with the investigation, but never pick a side. And as to your answer, the honest officers everywhere I go then, everywhere I went then, and now on my social media, they're still friends with me. Honest officers don't like corrupt officers any more than you or I do. And the corrupt officers, they hated me with a passion. They called me names and threatened me. That's the name of the game, you know.
Yeah, I can imagine it's got to be it's a rough position to be in, but you're right. It's very admirable to have someone in a position like that, because what if the investigator was corrupt too? Then nothing would ever get done. It wouldn't even be worth having the position. So to have someone who sees it from that point of view is like the perfect mindset to have.
Well, folks, that happens now that some investigators are corrupt. I don't have a YouTube called True Prison Stories just to tell one side. I tell all of it. Some people have a YouTube and everything's just the great stuff. Mine is the good and the bad, because how can it be true prison if you're not telling the whole story? Long story short, and I'll let you go on. We had a couple of prison inspectors get arrested, falsifying documents, trying to turn the case the wrong way. I'm glad they were arrested, and so were the honest inspectors. Every job in our country has a few bad apples, folks. I think the last average I heard, and I forget what study, 4 out of every 100 employees do something wrong or something illegal. So think of it that way. Don't think that the inspector's office can't have a bad apple as well.
You know, it's not a good comparison to try to compare prisons to schools, like a high school or something.
Right.
But I was just looking into some corruption cases in these big city public schools where a bunch of money gets, embezzled, or they cover up for a teacher who was abusing kids. And it's like, wow, there's a lot of the same stories, even though it's not the same population. High school students aren't the same as convicted offenders, but there's some similarities. Just too much power, not enough accountability. I can see how that works.
Mario had a question there. It looked pretty good.
Oh, Kat said, do you think officers participate in violent behavior towards inmates due to a group think mindset? And then Mario
Yes.
said a subculture formation with the COs.
Yeah, I think Mario and the other person have the same sort of question. Yes, that's another problem. We get that subculture built in, and then every inmate is a bad inmate. Listen, I'm going to tell you some things I've heard from a couple of officers. It's not good. I don't like it when I hear this. That just turns on a big bell in my mind. The only good inmate is a dead inmate. Now, come on. If an officer tells me that, now remember, I'm only talking about a small percentage. I just want you guys to keep an open mind. The majority of officers are honest and hardworking, but these type of officers I just mentioned, what does that tell you about that officer? What do you think? You think he's going to treat you?
They're unfit for duty. They should be fired immediately.
Yes. Yes. I agree.
Gosh, that's horrifying. Now,
Yeah,
if that was,
and of course, that's reported and investigated, by the way, folks. You don't just hear it and walk away. If you hear it and walk away, you're allowing this to continue. So you report that statement and let it go to get investigated.
you know, on that line there with the subcultures and things like that, is there's always been an accusation that in any culture, police, even military, and pretty much every job, is that there's a potential for racial discrimination against other employees. And you mentioned in your book that you investigated how some racial minorities were not being promoted. Is that part of that subculture filtration? You only want to promote people who are part of your group?
I'm going to tell you right now, that's what happened in that case at Hendry Correctional Institution, which is not far from Miami, folks, to give you an idea of that location. We're getting further south. We're not quite in the big cities of Dade County and Miami, but we're still in the rural, very, very rural area. All whites were promoted, and the Hispanic gentleman and the black gentleman had very good records because I was assigned, that's a civil case. Remember, I told you we investigate civil as well. And Tallahassee sent me down and said, these two have filed a civil case that they're not being promoted because they're black and they're Hispanic. Man, I'll tell you, it was a long, long, tedious investigation. You have to go through every applicant for years back, at least 5 years back. Long story short, as you know from the book, they hadn't promoted anybody other than whites for years and years. When I got done with my investigation, sent it to Tallahassee, and I had to interview both these gentlemen with their attorney, which is good. I wouldn't expect them not to have their attorney. I had to go to the civil attorney's office and interview them with their attorney, which was smart on their part, right? You need an attorney for these type things. I had no problem interviewing them with their attorney present. Long story short, we proved that their allegations were true. The very next two sergeant slots that came open, they got those sergeant slots. And things changed. Things started to change. You got to break that good old boy system, I call it. You guys said cultural and mindset. You got to break it.
It's great. I mean, so you must have had a big impact over your career of investigating these things and trying to get justice. There were a few times I was so frustrated at the end, though, where it would be the prosecutor drops the charges, or that they didn't get they might lose their job, but they didn't get a severe punishment. Were you a little frustrated with the ends of some of the outcomes of these cases?
Many times I was frustrated. There's one story about the officer who was married at the Dade Correctional Female Unit where he was having sex and bringing things to the inmates. We proved that was happening. We even had the female inmate wear a wire, but we couldn't catch him with the contraband, but we caught him with everything else, on tape. But Miami is such an overcrowded judicial system down there. They have such big fish to fry, as they say. They wouldn't prosecute this officer. And, cases like that, he's dirty. He gets away with being fired. His certification's pulled for life. He won't be an officer ever again. But you know darn well that they needed more than just that. And I blame the state attorneys need to be a little more vigilant. If an officer is under oath and wears the badge, and commits these crimes, come on now, let's hold them accountable. How? That's one reason. That's a good question too. That's one reason a lot of people continue taking chances. They're not seeing enough punishment.
I think that injustice is the one thing that hurts probably everyone kind of expects that a police officer or correctional officer, that there's always going to be a bad apple. And I think most people are reasonable in not blaming the whole profession just because of those. But when they're not held accountable, that really makes people angry. Why do they get held to a different standard?
Yes. And it's terrible. There's so many good things the officers do that we never get to see on the media. So that's why I'm writing my third book, to try to bring out to light the good side. I don't want to have it all on corruption, but that was a big part of my career, 12 years of my career.
Yeah. And, I've visited a lot of prisons, but as you know, a researcher, academic, I'm just getting the tour. I'm not seeing it from the inside like you, but when I would go and talk to people and officers and talk to the prisoners, a lot of them didn't have a bad impression of the officers. They'd say, oh, most of them are pretty good. You can talk to this guy. This guy will listen to your problems. This one doesn't cause any trouble, but there's that one guy on third shift. And so they can, even among the prisoners, they can separate the good apples from the bad apples. And
absolutely,
they have every incentive to be biased, but they're not mostly.
They know who's corrupt, who's honest, and who's weak. They know everything.
It is fascinating. I didn't assign your second book. I wish I had just done that. This whole class, I could just use your books as my curriculum, but your other book is Inside the Inner Circle, because we assigned the Corruption Behind Bars book. And there is one picture that you had in here that was in your second book that really surprised me, which is the cat with the contraband taped to his side, and they put the cats inside the prison.
Yes, it is unbelievable how many cats are in prison yards, not just here, all over the country. A lot of inmates that work in food service or don't work in food service, they sneak a little food out with them, and they feed these cats at night. The cats get through the perimeter without setting the alarms off. They can squeeze through these little places. So a lot of inmates make these cats their pets. Unfortunately, though, when a cat becomes every day going to the same spot, same time to get that food, they're good. They're a good transporter of drugs. And some people have taped drugs to these prison cats, we call them, and let them walk in. And then the inmate feeds the cat and gets the drugs. They think of many ways, folks.
The drones, I've seen some footage of them dropping from flying over top of the prison, dropping something in the yard. That's hard to fight against that.
Yes.
Kat said, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to read another question from Kat. She said, do you think that married officers will seek out sexual relationships with inmates because it's not allowed and risky? Or does the officer being married not affect their decision to engage in a sexual relationship with inmates?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I've had male and female officers that I investigated for having sexual relations with inmates. One of them was married. No, two of them were married to correctional officers that actually worked at the same prison with them. And one said that the inmate was a much better lover than her husband. And I guess we're all adults here. She even told me the inmate was larger than her husband. Now imagine me with my tape recorder going out listening to this stuff. And she liked the idea of having somebody confined so that when she went home, she knew he wasn't going to go anywhere and cheat on her, which led me to believe that maybe the spouse cheated on her and she's given some big payback here, just the wrong way, folks. So I've had them tell me that. I've had other women tell me, another married woman at Hardee Correctional, she said, I was told by my husband I'm stupid, I don't know anything, I'm ugly, we're not having sex at home, so I started with this inmate. Somebody she's got some issues about that other one, I agree.
Yeah, some of those are actually, you can feel really sorry for them, that they maybe have been manipulated, and you feel bad for them. It doesn't justify doing it, but you just feel sorry, like, okay, now you're being charged with a crime for what you did, just that it was that serious to them. And
Yes,
I don't know,
I actually did feel sorry for some. Now, a lot of them no, but some of them actually I did feel sorry for. But it didn't change the fact that they were going to be in trouble anyway, you know.
right. And, there are the cases, I think New Jersey's having a pretty big scandal right now of officers who were just systematically forcing themselves on women prisoners. And just,
That's a New Jersey women's prison having those issues right now. I've got a couple of, I have 3 or 4 New Jersey officer friends up there, and they said right now it's kind of hush hush because the investigation's going on, but it's not looking very good. What's going to happen there?
that's a scary thing. I mean, prison, removing someone from society, putting them in prison for a long period of time because of their crimes, it's not as clean as that. It's not as sanitary as that. They're being taken to a place where they're in danger from the other prisoners. And then to have the officers, you can't trust the officers, and the officers are abusing them. It's just nightmares. It just sounds so horrifying.
Yes, and you know, it's that now another thing that glorifies it, not to deglorify it, because I wrote books about corruption, so it's obviously a concern of mine. So don't think that it isn't, or I wouldn't have wrote these books. But the media takes these stories and plasters them all over the front page. When officers save an inmate's life, cut an inmate down who's trying to commit suicide and save his life, do good programs, do good things for inmates, that never makes the front page. You might get a little blurb on it.
Yeah. And, I one thing, I am writing a chapter for that book I was telling you about, and it's the academic perception of correctional officers, and how it is that people who do my job and they write academic articles and textbooks, they have not a kind word to say, but they're just really against prisons in general. They think we use them way too much, and that most of the prisoners should be released, if not all of them. And so they see correctional officers as just one more tool of the government to oppress people. And when you have that perception, it's really hard for me to talk to other academics and try to tell them, there was a correctional officer who saved someone's life. They were being stabbed or they were being sexually assaulted, and the officer saved them. And they don't even want to hear those stories. They don't want to imagine that there are good apples. They think they're all bad apples. And that's really tough for me to try to do research that's fair.
That's very sad, very, very sad, because, the majority of officers that I ever ran into would not hurt anybody. Now, across from my tape recorder, I ran into those bad apples that would hurt somebody. And yes, they have a point with those guys and girls, but I don't know why they can't give the honest officers the credit that's due. And that's why I'm writing this 3rd book, to show that we have the other side of the coin that we must be aware of. And I can even go so far to say that we could release a lot of inmates, but there's some inmates you don't want on the street. They will kill and kill again, or rape and rape again, or hurt a child again. My opinion. So if I lose a few votes on that one, I'm sorry, but I tell it like I see it.
No, I understand. And that's definitely something that I try to emphasize in this class, at least, is we spend a lot of time talking about California prisons. And you've got supermax prisons out there where people have stabbed their cellmate. You give them another cellmate, they stab him. You give them another cellmate, they stab them. And so then you put them in solitary confinement because they can't get along well with others. But that's cruel to put them in solitary. Well, they've stabbed 5 people. Is it cruel to keep giving them targets? When do you draw the line?
Well, we have to protect other inmates, folks, as well. Inmates know that, but a lot of the public don't. I can go to 10 inmates and say, that we got that guy out of here that killed Johnny because we want to protect you. And they'll go, thank you, thank you, thank you. Keep that crazy blankety blank away from us. He'll hurt us, and they thank us. But see, the public never sees the part where the inmates are thanking us.
Oh, that surprised me a lot. There was a lawsuit filed, went all the way to the Supreme Court, where prisoners sued because they didn't feel like they were protected enough, that they knew there were dangerous predators in the minimum security prisons. They wanted them to be transferred, and it was actually indifference on the part of the warden that he wouldn't transfer them. So they want you to transfer to higher security.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It is fascinating, and I don't want to go too far into all my interest, the things that I'm interested in. There's another question here: is are relationships between two women or two men as common with the officers and the inmates as they are between the inmates? So, are there any same-sex relationships between officers and the prisoners?
Yes, great question. We'll start with the officers. Folks, we have a lot of women couples and men couples coming to our prisons and applying together and working in the prison. Why are they such great employees? They don't get involved in all this junk we're talking about, from my experience. I don't think I've ever investigated a woman couple working in the prison together or a man couple working in the prison together doing these sex with inmates things. I don't know what the difference is, but are they more satisfied with a relationship? I don't know. But that's a great question. We have lots of couples like that working in the prison system. They do their job very well, and they seem to pay close attention to detail, and they really seem to stop the inmates the minute the inmates try to manipulate them. They have a keen sense for telling that inmate, you stop right there. We're not playing that game. I think it's great. That's what we need more of. That's what we're trying to get. Now, I had an officer.
Oh, you got muted again. Sorry.
In with the master key and caught the male officer, male inmate together in a closet. That has happened. At the women's prisons, yes, we've had female officers caught having sexual relations with a female inmate. So I hope that answers your question. We've seen all these things.
Might request go to protective custody because they're afraid of the other prisoners. Is that pretty common in Florida?
Yes, very common, I would say, in any prison, but I'll speak for Florida. When a child molester or a pedophile goes to prison, they don't have to be placed in protective custody, like a lot of people think that they're automatic. They have to, they're classified by classification. Some may go directly to protective custody, depending on the high profile media of the case. Some may be put in open population, but they can request at any time protection. Please put me in protective custody. They'll be placed in an administrative cell. I don't want to use confinement. That seems to bother some people, but hey, they asked to be put away separate. So we do that. Now the classification team will hear their issue. When the classification team hears why they're scared or why they're in fear, they will determine whether to place them in protective custody or not. It happens a lot, and they have that right. I don't like child molesters or pedophiles, but they have the right of as anybody else does to be protected, and that is our job, to protect them.
Do you think the prisoners who attack them see themselves as doing like a vigilante, that they're doing something for society, or why do they attack them?
Yes, I did a video on pedophiles in prison, and it's got tons and tons of comments on there. I did it to just show the way it is. Everybody's been pretty decent about it. I think some people thought I was a little harsh in that video, but I did say in the video, we have to protect them. It is our job to protect them, but they do get killed by inmates. No matter how hard we try to protect them, prison is prison, and they can find ways to get to them one way or another on any given day. Another way they can get to them is pay off an officer to look the other way. That's another corruption issue that can happen. But the Now, ask me that question again. I wanted to get that point out there.
Oh, sorry. I was just asking if why do the other prisoners attack sex offenders
Yeah.
specifically?
They think they're doing a favor to society. Now, here's what a lot of people said about that on my video. They are killing another person. They're in prison themselves. They may be even in there for murder or rape, but they're killing a child molester. Now, what kind of justice is that? And that's true. You know, you're in there for something in prison, some of them for bad, real bad things, and now you're killing a child molester. Where's the food chain? You know, you murdered somebody and you killed a child molester. Are you better than him now? You know, it doesn't make sense, but prison life doesn't make sense sometimes, the way they do their chain of order and chain of events. But now I'm going to tell you, it is true, though. 99% of your inmates hate child molesters.
I think I talked to one prisoner in Ohio. He really resented the fact that he had a 5-year prison sentence for stealing cars, and a child molester had a 3-year sentence. And he thought stealing a car is nowhere near as bad as molesting a child, and he wanted revenge to make it even. That, you know, society, the judges are what's wrong, the laws are wrong. And I had a hard time disagreeing with him.
How do you argue that? I mean, the laws, I mean, this criminal justice system is the best we have right now, but they seem to get things backwards sometimes. Now, if he kills the child molester, he's just bought himself, you know, a murder charge now, so that wouldn't do him any good to do that. But I understand what he's saying. That doesn't make sense.
Ryan said the law will usually protect property over people because this is America. You know, I hate to agree with that in a general sense, but I'm sure if I got the statistics, I might be able to find some cases where that is the case. And I don't know. I guess we shouldn't probably criticize the law too much. This is our one chance to talk to about other things, but you're right.
Well, that's a good point. It's a good point. I mean, it kind of goes back to the statement you just said. You know, you took a car, we're going to give you 5 years, and you molested a child, we'll give you 3. So what's more important, the property or a child's life? Pretty good point there.
It is. It's really sad, and I think, you know, if I were the king of America, maybe I would change quite a few of our laws. But you know, just I think sometimes some laws outpace others. Like when there was the war on drugs. I've seen people's lives absolutely ruined by drugs. It's one thing we talk a lot in this class is drug treatment, trying to help people who are addicted. But when they did the war on drugs, that got politicians to start increasing punishments more and more for possessing or having paraphernalia. You can get a felony in my state, in Ohio, for possessing just the paraphernalia for injection drug use. So that's 1 year in prison for that. And but then other crimes like sex offenses just have been on the books for so long, they didn't get increases. So one of them just outpaced the other. Mario asked, what is a leading change or incorporation you would like to see into your correctional facilities? What do you think could be done to improve prisons in Florida?
Well, let's just say prisons everywhere. And some of these wardens may not like my answer, but I'm going to tell you, as you said, you and I can't change it, but if they put me in charge, I would like to see jails and prison nationwide to come together and say, okay, we need to train and train hard in inmate manipulation and ethics. Why ethics? Because if you're an ethical officer, ethical leader, you're going to be trained to do the right thing, not the wrong thing. So I would like to see some very hard training. I would also like in ethics and inmate manipulation. I would also like to see some stronger sanctions placed when an officer smuggles drugs in a prison and you go to the court and they say, well, he has no prior record. Well, of course he has no prior record. You can't be an officer if you have a prior record. But he wore the uniform and the badge and he smuggled drugs or a weapon into a prison. Slap on the hand and 1 year probation is not enough. I think prison sentence immediately. Same if you're caught abusing an inmate. like in my book, you know, where they beat the inmate for 5 days. 3 of those officers got federal probation for 5 years because they told the truth. The others got acquitted because the jury was not going to punish officers because of an inmate. Well, see, that's wrong. These guys killed that inmate. Prison's where they should have went. So we need to be harsh when a uniformed officer does something like this. Also, when inmates kill an officer or when inmates harm an officer, I would like to see stronger sanctions as well. See, we're not going to do one side and not the other. We're going to do both sides fair and equally. So I would like to see that being implemented. I would like to go over the whole system and see. We have some people say there is no such thing as nonviolent criminal. You know, people say they're only in there for marijuana. That's a nonviolent crime. And then we have a lot of sheriffs and police chiefs say, no, that is a violent crime because marijuana leads to this, this, and this. I say, look at each case individually. And I think we could release a lot of inmates from prison. But I'm definitely not going to release somebody that's going to harm somebody possibly. Even if I see the possibility that they could harm another human being, I don't want them released from prison. There's a huge overhaul that could be done. But folks, why are we always talking about this? When I say we, why is legislature always talking about this? Every politician, only when they're about to be voted in, elect me and I'll fix this criminal justice system. Elect me and I'll fix these prison problems. And they don't fix anything. You elect them because you wanted the prison fixed. They fix nothing. It's about time we get some people to run for these political positions that will actually fix something. Maybe I went off too much on that one.
No, not at all. I could not agree more. But you know, you mentioned one thing that got me thinking is, okay, so they're in prison and you're investigating things that happen to them while they're in prison, and then they're going to be released, the ones who are going to be released. What do you think is the best thing you can do to prepare them for life on the outside?
Well, when we need more programs, we have programs. When people say we don't have them, we do, but not a lot. Okay, not a lot of programs. Some will argue with me on that, but we could get more programs in there. But here's the thing: back to the politicians, we need that funding to get more programs, funding for pay raises, etc., for the officers. But we need to send inmates to a prison at their last year or two. We have a couple of these here in Florida that gets them set for life, trying to get them set for stepping out the door. You know how many inmates walk out of the door with no driver's license, no money, no job, no family to go to? Where's your success story there? How are they going to change their life? So we need to have programs, which we're starting to get now in Florida, where we set them up with a GED before they get out. They get that done. We set them up with a valid driver's license. If their charge won't allow them a driver's license, a valid state ID, their birth certificate. Some of them don't know how to get copies of all this. When they walk out the door, they have a packet now. So now they go for a job and somebody says, I need a copy of your birth certificate. I need your driver's license. I need this. Bam, it's ready. You know how many inmates get out of prison and they're not sure how to gather all these materials? Let's get them the basics first and some more education. And remember, only the inmate can better themselves, though. Let's provide them what they need, but that individual has to be ready to change on their own.
Do you think that, you know, with a lot of people on probation and parole, people always see that as an option of do that instead of sending them to prison, do more probation and parole. But there's a lot of people on probation and parole, and you did work with community corrections. If there's too many people there and there's not enough resources, not enough officers, you're overwhelmed, too many people on your caseload. It sounds like if they really want to invest into alternatives of prison, they should be funded as well as the prisons.
Yes, probation and parole is such a super important element of the criminal justice system. and people forget about it. And it can change people. When I saw people successfully get off probation, and I gave them their final paper saying you're no longer on probation, and then they come back and bring me something. Well, I could take it then because they're not on probation anymore. Sometimes they would try to bring me a gift, come for their monthly visit. I couldn't accept it because they're on probation. We're not allowed to accept gifts from offenders, which is a good thing, right? Because that starts that friend process thing again. We don't want to be unfriendly. We want to be fair with them. But it was always a reward when I saw somebody get off probation and be successful. But the other side of the coin is so many people violate their probation. That's why they end up back in prison. I'm the probation officer. I can't just say, well, I'm going to skip this one and give you another chance. I have to write a violation report. And then where we're at now, we're back in front of the judge, and the judge makes a decision where they go from there.
I see. It's very complicated. And I think hopefully in this classes, I'm trying to teach the best I can, just how complex the system is, what the alternatives are, what the most effective practices are. And then every time I get to the prison part, I start talking about violence in prison and the way prisoners attack each other, just how really terrible life in prison is. I wonder why people keep going back. Once you get out and you've lived there and it's been so terrible, why do they commit new crimes when they get out? It just surprises me. And I understand they're committing crimes for reasons that aren't just because they're not afraid enough. They know prison better than any of us, but they keep going back.
A lot of them have told me, I'm glad you brought that up, when I was a probation officer, I violated my probation on purpose to go back to prison. I have no place to stay. I don't like staying at the Salvation Army. I got no place to go. I got 3 meals a day and a place to sleep in the prison. That's true, folks. I've been told. I say, why, John, did you violate probation? Why did you go into that grocery store and steal 2 steaks in front of everybody and put them in your jacket? That's a true story I'm telling, by the way. Yes, I did it because I wanted to go back to prison. I knew violation would get me there. I'm not surviving out here. Others are mental illness, which is a whole nother topic. Mental illness, homeless. Somebody's asking a homeless question. I guess you can ask me in a minute. Homeless, mental illness, a lot of that is filling our prisons now. You have to remember that's where a big portion of our inmates are coming from.
It is fascinating. And I think a lot of my students have to leave because can you believe we just talked for over an hour and 10 minutes? I could talk to you forever. But it'll be great. I really would love to talk to you some more to get, I've been working on some big projects, and you're going to contribute a chapter to a book I'm writing about correctional officers.
Correct.
You sent it to me and I read it. It's great. And I can't wait to include that. So I'm trying to get researchers to take the correctional officer profession a little more seriously. I don't know if I'll achieve that, but I'll definitely try. And having your contributions, I really appreciate that you've saved people's lives. You actually have, everyone can complain about the system, but how many people actually have made a difference by holding people accountable, doing the investigations? So I'm really grateful. But before you go, could you answer this question? Do you find a lot of homeless people in prison for the same reason you just mentioned? Do they actually commit crimes in order to go to prison if they were homeless?
Yes, they commit crimes to get in the jail. And then if they're released from the jail, a few months later, they commit another crime until they get enough points to go to prison. They just don't want to be on the street. They figure I'm going to get medical care, dental care, and 3 meals a day. Okay, I'm not going to blame them for that. They got no place to go. The mentally ill now, that's another issue as well. A lot of them are in our prison system, and we're not trained. We're trained in crisis negotiation, how to handle somebody, crisis intervention, but we're not trained in how to treat the mentally ill. Yes, we have doctors at the prison that are there, but the prisons are not equipped for mentally ill. So what do we need to do? Do we need to build a home? More homes for the homeless? Do we need to build more mental health institutions? Instead of building more mental health institutions, they're closing them. across the country. Google that. Mental health institutions closing. How's that helping our prison population? Ryan just said free labor for the private prisons. Well, I don't like private prisons. I'll say that now. I've had some private prison people get mad at me. I had to investigate in 2 of our private prisons here because they were state inmates in a private prison, which gave me the authority to investigate. They don't like us coming into their prisons at all. Everything that I found from private prisons is hush, hush, don't tell them a thing. And I'm thinking, why are you hiding all this? I don't like private prisons. I had no problem when the president closed down the private prisons in the federal government. Now, we still have our state private prisons that are open. That's up to each state on what they want to do. But yeah, private prisons for profit is not the answer, folks.
That's a great point, Ryan. I'll bring that up. Maybe I'll be able to talk a little bit about private prisons later and later in the course. If anybody needs to leave the class, you're free to go. I know the class time's up, and if you had any extra questions and you want me to ask Mr. York, just email me and I'll send them to him. I'm sure he'd like to answer them. And then if you all want to give me permission to give him to forward your book reviews to him so he can read your book reviews, just let me know and I'll be glad to send them.
You're welcome, everyone. I see the thank yous. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jonathan.